Furious neighbors discovered the helicopter disturbing their sleep belonged to the fire department. When the truth came out, the captain faced hostility and rejection in her own home. An unexpected emergency changed everything, revealing the true meaning of community and heroism, a story of snap judgments and redemption that will move you. Get ready to question your own attitudes. Subscribe, hit like, and let us know where you're tuning in from. Have you ever felt like throwing a water balloon at someone? I have, literally, every day. Especially when they look at me like I'm some apocalyptic villain just for doing my job. And what a job it is, let me tell you, saving lives. But apparently that doesn't matter when you wake people up at 3 in the morning, right? Seriously, I never imagined my helicopter would be more hated in the Condo building than the guy in 302 who plays the off-key saxophone at 10 p.m. The difference? I save people. He just butchers Mozart every night. Welcome to my personal hell, a condo complex called Summit View Condos, where the only summit seems to be the peak of dirty looks I get every morning. I'm 35, a captain with the fire department, and until 6 months ago I thought my biggest challenge was coordinating rescues in extreme situations. Naive. Truly naive. No fire burns as hot as the tongue of Eleanor, our HOA president, when she decides to add fuel to the fire of discord. It all started when I decided to move here. You know when you think, I'll live somewhere quiet, close to nature, where I can relax after exhausting days? Yeah, big mistake. I arrived on a stormy day, typical for the mountain area, complete with lightning, thunder, and all that meteorological theatrics that seems to announce something will go wrong. And it did. The move had barely begun when my radio crackled. Emergency. An elderly man trapped in his house, waist-deep in water in an at-risk area. I dropped everything, and when I say everything, I mean literally boxes blocking half the hallway on my floor, and ran out. What could I do? Say, sorry sir, who is currently drowning, I'm busy organizing my succulent collection. When I returned, 10 hours later, soaked and exhausted, I found a little pink note stuck to my door. Handwritten, with that perfect, passive-aggressive script only certain older ladies can master. Attention, common areas are not an extension of your apartment. Please remove your belongings immediately. Sincerely, the HOA president. Sincerely? Seriously? The only sincere thing there was the lack of attention to the fact that I might have been, saving a life. And you know what's worse? At that moment, I had no idea that little pink note was just the prelude to the symphony of horrors to come. In the first few days, I tried to keep a low profile. I swear I tried. I organized my apartment, smiled at neighbors in the elevator, that strained smile you give when you mean, please don't hate me, and even considered baking. A cake for the HOA president. A cake. Me who can barely tell flour from cornstarch, but I was willing to try, you understand? That's when I received the notice about the first HOA meeting. I thought, perfect. I'll introduce myself, explain my job, build connections. Oh, sweet illusion. I walked into the community room where about 20 people were sitting in plastic chairs arranged in a circle, like some kind of group therapy session. And it was, except I was the only problem there. I barely opened my mouth to say, hi, I'm the new resident in 507, when Eleanor, the same one from the note, cut me off with the subtlety of an axe. Ah, so you're the owner of the infernal noise that's been waking everyone up at 3 in the morning? Silence, the heavy kind, 20 pairs of eyes drilling into me as if I'd confessed to a heinous crime. I swallowed hard. Actually, I'm not the owner of the noise. I'm a captain with the fire department, and we're not interested in your title, honey. We're interested in our sleep. Honey? Honey? Nothing in that tone indicated any kind of affection. It was more of a honey that meant, I want you gone. The helicopter is necessary for rescue operations, and another interruption. This time from Walter, a man in his 70s who, I later gathered, was the unofficial spokesman for the complaints. Look, miss, we understand your job is important, but couldn't you park that thing somewhere else? Some people here take sleeping pills and still wake up with that noise. Park, like the helicopter was my car that I could just leave in the next building's garage. I took a deep breath, a technique learned in stress management training. It didn't work. Sir, It's not like I can choose where emergencies happen. The helicopter goes where people need help. That's when Mildred from 201, a lady I later discovered, had the incredible ability to complain about absolutely everything, from the color of the sky to the texture of the bakery bread, dropped this gem. And why do these emergencies always happen in the middle of the night? Can't they be scheduled during business hours? I swear, she actually asked that, as if I had control over when a landslide occurs or when someone has a heart attack on a mountaintop. "Excuse me, sir, having a heart attack. Could you postpone your infarction until after 9 a.m.? My neighbors need their sleep." And that was my warm welcome. I left that meeting labeled as the problem neighbor, the inconvenient one, the disturber of the peace. And the worst part? I didn't even get a chance to explain properly. The complaints were so numerous and loud that my voice disappeared in that storm of indignation. In the following days, I started noticing the consequences. In the elevator, people stopped talking when I entered. In the parking garage, I got dirty looks. At the front desk, Joe, who smiled at everyone, mysteriously lost the ability to smile when he saw me. The last straw came the following week when I found out they had filed a formal complaint with the fire department. Yes, an official letter signed by almost all the residents, sent to my chief, complaining about the improper and disruptive use of the helicopter and questioning if it was really necessary for me specifically to pilot night operations. I almost lost my newly earned position because of it. I had to explain to the chief that no, I wasn't using the helicopter for joyrides or to scare pigeons. I was, surprise, surprise, doing my job. And then came the Sunday of the community potluck, a Condo tradition that Eleanor made sure to inform me about, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Everyone brings a signature dish. It's an opportunity to integrate, if you want to join, of course. That if you want carried the implicit weight of you're obligated to come if you don't want to make your situation even worse. I decided to accept the challenge. I spent the entire night preparing my grandma's famous chili. And mind you, I'm not much of a cook. My relationship with the stove is more like we see each other now and then, no strings attached. I arrived at the community room carrying a huge pot, smiling as if I were completely at ease. I wasn't, and placed my masterpiece on the table between a chicken pot pie that looked like something out of a magazine and a hearty casserole that made your mouth water just looking at it. Wow, you actually cooked. I thought firefighters only ate ramen. Mildred, of course, with her usual tact. "Surprisingly, we can operate a stove without setting the station on fire," I replied, trying to sound humorous, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a nervous bark. For a moment, I thought things were improving. People at least feigned interest when I mentioned my grandmother's recipe. Walter even tried it and said it wasn't bad, which, coming from him, was equivalent to a Michelin star. And then, at the exact moment Eleanor was preparing to serve her custard, which, according to everyone there, was legendary, it happened. My pager went off. That unmistakable beep that means one thing: someone needs me now. I jumped up, bumping the table. And then, as if in slow motion, I saw Eleanor's custard, her pride and joy, her culinary masterpiece, majestically slide across the tabletop and hit the floor with a wet splat. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. A knife Eleanor probably wished she could use on me at that moment. I'm so sorry. Emergency, I stammered, already running for the exit. Of course it's an emergency. It always is, isn't it? Her voice, as cold as the custard, and now spread across the floor. I left there with the sound of snickers and not-so-subtle comments behind me. There goes the custard killer, off to save the world again. Very funny, hilarious, really. Especially since the emergency was a wildfire threatening to engulf 3 communities. When I returned 18 hours later, covered in soot and smelling of smoke down to my soul, I found another note on the door. "The cost of cleaning the community room will be added to your next HOA fee. Sincerely, the HOA president." Sincerely, again. I began to suspect that word didn't mean what Eleanor thought it meant. The following weeks were an exercise in mutual avoidance. I avoided common areas. They avoided speaking to me directly, although they had no problem talking about me loudly when I passed by. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday, I was on my day off. Yes, we have days off. We're not robots. Surprising. I know, trying to watch a series and pretend I had a normal life when I heard screams in the hallway. Fire! Help! My body reacted before my brain. In seconds, I was in the hallway, following the smoke to its source. Apartment 202. Precisely. The apartment of Martha, the elderly neighbor who complained the most about the helicopter noise. I didn't think twice. I broke down the door. Breaching techniques are part of basic training, in case you were wondering, and found Martha in a panic as her curtains blazed, quickly spreading to the sofa. "Stay low!" I yelled, gently pushing her towards the floor where the air was more breathable. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the hall and started fighting the fire while shouting instructions to the onlookers already gathering at the door. When the other firefighters arrived, called by some neighbor, the fire was already under control. Martha, in shock but unharmed, held my hand tightly. You saved my life," she murmured, her eyes watery, perhaps from the smoke, perhaps from emotion. "It's my job, Martha." I smiled, exhausted but relieved. It was the first time someone in the condo building looked at me and really saw me, not as the inconvenient helicopter lady, but as someone who was there to help. In the following days, I noticed a slight change. Martha now smiled when she saw me. She even left a small container of pumpkin bread at my door, with a note saying thank you. No, sincerely, just a heartfelt thanks. A few other neighbors started greeting me with timid nods. One or two even stopped to exchange a few words in the elevator. Small victories, I thought. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to get better. And it really seemed like they were until the damn annual city festival, an event that, from what I gathered, was the event of the year in that community. Music, dancing, local food, crafts. Each condo complex in the area set up a booth to show off its community pride. Eleanor's words, not mine. On an impulse of optimism, or insanity, I still haven't decided, I volunteered to help organize the Summit View booth. After all, organization is my thing. If I can command rescue operations in hard-to-reach areas, setting up a food stall couldn't be that hard, right? Wrong. Oh, so wrong. First, because I didn't count on the festival committee, read Eleanor and her friends, questioning every single one of my suggestions. Second, because on setup day, I was called away for an emergency and had to leave half the work undone. And third, and most disastrously, because during the festival itself, when everything was finally ready, and I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I had managed to redeem myself, it happened. The helicopter. Yes, that helicopter flying over the festival as part of a planned rescue demonstration, a display I knew was happening, of course, but completely forgot to mention to the neighbors. The scene was surreal. The roar of the blades, overpowering the music, people looking up, pointing, and then all eyes turning to me, accusingly, as if I had brought the helicopter specifically to ruin the festival, as if I had some kind of remote control from hell that activated that machine just to disturb the peace. You knew about this, didn't you? Eleanor, obviously leading the chorus of indignation. Yes, but... And you didn't warn us? You let them ruin our booth, our festival? How could I explain that between coordinating a real rescue that very morning and worrying about the festival? The latter simply slipped my mind. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention there would be a demonstration, but it's not like it's ruining the festival. It's an official presentation part of the program. Oh, of course, and coincidentally, it's your helicopter, isn't it? It's not my helicopter, it's the fire department's, and we don't care. You're doing this on purpose, showing off your noisy little toy just to provoke us. Little toy. Little toy, an AS-350 helicopter, equipped with a rescue hoist, firefighting system and emergency medical equipment. A little toy that cost more than the entire condo complex and had already saved hundreds of lives, including potentially hers if she ever needed it. That's when a voice rose from the crowd, calm, firm, authoritative in a way only decades in a classroom can hone. That's enough, Eleanor. You're being unfair and you know it. Margaret, the retired teacher from 405, a woman in her 70s, white hair always impeccably styled, colorful glasses perched on a face marked by time and smiles. We had never talked much beyond good morning and good afternoon, but there she was taking my side. Unfair? She's the one who's been disturbing our peace for months, Margaret. She's been saving lives for months, that's what. Or have you? Forgotten how the firefighters rescued your grandson when he got lost on the trail last year? Silence. Eleanor opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. And you, Walter? Have you forgotten who pulled your wife out of that car when the road collapsed in the 2019 storm? Another. Silence. And you, Martha? Are you going to deny you'd be dead if it weren't for her last week? One by one, Margaret reminded everyone there of moments when the fire department, the very same one with the noisy helicopters, had made a difference in their lives. It was the first time I saw Eleanor speechless. It didn't last long, of course. She muttered something about "still could have warned us" and stomped off, taking her cloud of indignation with her. But something had changed. After that, Margaret became my unexpected ally. I discovered she had been rescued from an emergency situation years earlier, a car accident on the highway during a storm, when the only possible access was by helicopter. "I know what it's like to see that machine arriving when you've lost all hope," she told me one day, having coffee in my still somewhat messy kitchen. "It's the most beautiful sound in the world." With her help, I started planning a way to show the neighbors the importance of my work, not to brag, but so they could understand why that noise was sometimes necessary. The opportunity came sooner than we expected, but in the worst way possible. The drought that hit the region that month was the worst in decades. The days dragged on, hot and dusty, the sky a merciless blue, cloudless, with no promise of relief. In the condo building, the problem materialized unexpectedly. The water supply system began to fail. First, the pressure dropped. Then, periods without any water began. Tension grew along with the temperature. The complaints, now not directed at me at least, multiplied. On a particularly hot afternoon, when the situation was already unbearable, I decided to take a look at the system. It wasn't exactly my area of expertise, but years of dealing with emergency equipment give you a certain understanding of how things work. I discovered the problem wasn't just the lack of water from the city, but a faulty pressure pump in the building, aggravated by some leaks in the system. With the help of a few residents, who surprisingly volunteered when they heard I was trying to fix the situation, we improvised a temporary fix. It wasn't perfect, but it allowed everyone to have water for a few hours each day, alternating between floors, until the permanent repair could be made. I saw admiration in some eyes. I heard reluctant thanks from others. Eleanor limited herself to a stiff nod, which, coming from her, was almost a medal of honor. A little progress, I thought. Maybe, just maybe, I was starting to be accepted not just as the crazy helicopter lady, but as someone who could contribute to the community. And then, the unthinkable happened. The rain, when it finally came, wasn't a relief, but a catastrophe. After months of drought, the hardened ground couldn't absorb the water, which ran off, forming devastating flash floods. In a few hours, the city was underwater. Summit View, built on higher ground, was spared the worst. But the rest of the city wasn't so lucky. Emergency calls poured in non-stop. All teams were mobilized, including, of course, the helicopter. I barely had time to tell anyone in the building. I spent days in the air, rescuing people from rooftops, delivering supplies to isolated areas, transporting the sick and injured. I returned to the station only to refuel and head out again. On the third day of the flood, when I finally got a few hours of rest, I went back to the condo for a hot shower and possibly 2 hours of sleep before returning to work. I was so exhausted, I barely registered the looks I received in the lobby. It was only when I reached my floor that I realized people weren't looking at me with irritation. They were looking at me with respect. A woman I barely knew from 502 stopped me to say, "We saw you on the news, rescuing that family from the roof. It was incredible." A man in the elevator commented, "My nephew lives in that neighborhood. You helped evacuate. He said you guys saved a lot of people." And at my door, instead of the usual complaint notes, there was a basket, homemade bread, some fruit, a container of still warm soup, and a note. "To keep your strength up. We're proud of you. Your neighbors at Summit View," I cried, right there in the hallway like a child. From exhaustion, relief, surprise, I had spent so much time trying to prove my worth to these people that I didn't expect this gesture. Not then, not like that. But the real surprise came the next day. When I returned to the station, I discovered that the condo complex, yes, Summit View, had offered itself as a staging area for rescue operations. The pool area, located on the highest part of the property, would be used as a base for the helicopter. That helicopter, the same one that disturbed sleep and ruined the peace, was now welcome, necessary, essential. When we landed there for the first time, I expected to find only the technical crew. Instead, there was a small crowd. Residents who had volunteered to help, organizing supplies, preparing food for the rescue teams, doing what they could. And there was Eleanor, supervising everything with the same relentless efficiency with which she used to organize her complaints. When I stepped out of the helicopter, she approached. For a moment, I thought I was going to get some criticism about how I landed or how much dust I'd kicked up. Instead, she extended her hand. "Good job, Captain." Those 3 words were worth more than any elaborate speech. In the following weeks, as the city slowly recovered, I saw a transformation in the Condo building. People didn't just tolerate my presence, they sought it out. They asked about my work, how they could help, what I needed. The helicopter, once seen as a noisy intruder, was now a source of pride. When it flew over the building, people came out onto their balconies to wave. Some even took pictures. And then, just when everything seemed to be heading towards a happy ending, Eleanor played her final card. She called an extraordinary meeting to discuss regulations regarding aerial operations near the condominium. My heart sank. After everything, after seeing the work we did, after participating in that work, she still wanted to prohibit me from landing the helicopter there. The meeting was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon. The community room was packed. More people than I'd ever seen at any previous meeting. Eleanor, in her usual place at the front, clipboard in hand, expression serious. "This meeting has been called to discuss the proposed regulation regarding aerial operations near our condominium," she began, formal as ever. "As you all know, we recently had an extraordinary situation that required extraordinary measures. However, now that the situation has normalized, we need to establish clear rules." I felt my face burn. Here it comes, I thought, the ban disguised as regulation. "According to municipal regulations," she continued, adjusting her glasses to read an official document, "landing aircraft in residential areas without specific authorization is prohibited, except in emergency situations." I opened my mouth to protest, but Margaret, sitting beside me, gently held my arm, signaling me to wait. That's when I had an idea. If Eleanor wanted to play the regulation game, so could I. I asked for the floor. "Before we vote on anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'd like to invite everyone to visit the fire station, to see how our work functions, how we make decisions about when and where to use the helicopter. I think everyone deserves to fully understand before deciding." To my surprise, Eleanor agreed. "I think that's fair. We'll postpone the vote until after this visit." On the scheduled day, almost all the residents showed up. I showed them the equipment, explained the protocols, let them see the operations room where decisions were made. I introduced my colleagues who shared stories of successful rescues, and some that weren't, showing the real weight of our job. I saw eyes widen when I explained that I often slept at the station after long shifts to be available for new emergencies, which explained my frequent absences from the condo and perhaps why it always seemed like the helicopter followed me. The most touching moment came when Margaret asked to speak. Her voice thick with emotion, she told her own rescue story from years ago, how she had lost hope, trapped in a partially submerged car until she heard the sound of the rotor blades. That sound, which many of you consider a nuisance, was the difference between life and death for me, she concluded, discreetly wiping away a tear. So, before we complain, maybe we should ask ourselves, what if it were us? What if we were the ones needing to hear that noise in the middle of the night? The silence that followed was deep, reflective. I saw people exchanging glances, nodding slightly, rethinking. At the vote, which took place the following week, the atmosphere was completely different from the tension I had expected. Eleanor stood at the front, as always, but there was something different in her posture. "Before we begin the vote on the proposed regulation," she announced, surprising everyone, "I would like to give the floor to someone who has asked to speak." A young woman I didn't know stood up. I later found out she was Eleanor's daughter, a medical student visiting her mother that weekend. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, visibly nervous. Many of you don't know me, but my mother has lived here for years. I'm in my final year of medical school, and I came to say something. I chose my career after seeing the work of firefighters." She paused, her eyes shining with restrained emotion. "When I was 15, a friend of mine had a serious accident during a hike. He was rescued by helicopter. I saw firsthand what those professionals did, the difference they made, and I decided I wanted to do the same for other people." She looked directly at me. Seeing the captain's work during the floods reminded me why I chose this path. And I think all of you also remembered something important. That noise in the middle of the night means someone is being saved. Eleanor, for the first time since I'd met her, seemed stripped of her usual armor of relentless efficiency. There was pride in her eyes as she looked at her daughter, and something else when she looked at me: respect. "Considering everything we've seen and heard," she said, returning to her formal tone but without the usual harshness, "I am withdrawing the proposed regulation. Instead, I propose that we create a communication system so residents can be notified when possible about nighttime operations. And also," she added with a small smile, "that we consider the captain a valuable resource for our condominium, not a problem." The proposal was approved unanimously, and as people applauded, yes, applauded, I realized I had finally found my place in that community. In the following weeks, the condo complex transformed. Residents created a WhatsApp group where I could notify them about scheduled operations. Some even organized a support system, preparing meals for me on days with prolonged emergencies. And the most surprising thing, Eleanor took it upon herself to explain about the helicopter to new residents. "We have a fire captain living here," she would say, with a pride I never imagined hearing in her voice. "Sometimes the helicopter makes noise, but it's a small price to pay for having our own heroine." Heroine. I never saw myself that way. I just do my job, like anyone else. But I confess it felt good after so much conflict, to feel accepted. The real celebration came at the condo's traditional summer block party. The courtyard decorated with colorful banners, a controlled bonfire, under my supervision of course, music, food, and that sense of community I had been seeking since I moved in. I was chatting with some neighbors when Eleanor climbed onto the small makeshift stage. She asked for silence and then, to my complete astonishment, called my name. Confused, I went up, wondering if I had done something wrong. Maybe the bonfire was too big, or were they bothered by the siren of the fire truck some colleagues brought for the kids to see? Instead of a complaint, I received a box. Inside, custom earplugs for all the residents, stamped with the fire department logo. "So we can sleep peacefully knowing you're doing what needs to be done," Eleanor explained, with a smile that for the first time reached her eyes. "And so you don't have to worry about us anymore when you're out saving lives." It was at that moment I realized, community isn't a place without conflict. It's a place where conflicts can be resolved, where people can grow together, learn from each other. A few weeks later, I returned from a particularly difficult operation, a rescue in a landslide area that lasted over 24 hours. I was exhausted, sore, just wanting a hot shower and my bed. When I opened my apartment door, I found something unexpected. My pantry was stocked with homemade food, bread, sweets, a lasagna, still warm in the oven, and a note on the kitchen table. In that perfect handwriting I knew so well. "For our noisy heroine, rest well, you deserve it. Sincerely, Eleanor. Sincerely." This time the word meant exactly what it should. 6 months after that storm marked my arrival, I look out my apartment window and see Summit View condos completely differently. It's not just a place to live, it's a home. With all its imperfections, conflicts and reconciliations. I still pilot the helicopter on night operations. I still wake people up at 3 in the morning. But now, when I fly over the building, I sometimes see lights turn on in windows. Not in irritation, but in recognition. A small wave, a gesture of, "We're with you." And I learned something crucial, that balance doesn't mean choosing between work and personal life, but finding ways to integrate the two. That asking for help isn't weakness, but a way to strengthen bonds. The condo community, in turn, learned to see beyond the immediate inconvenience, to perceive the greater purpose behind the noise, to judge less and understand more. And as for the helicopter, Oh, it's still noisy, it still wakes people up in the middle of the night. But now, when residents hear the sound of the rotor blades cutting through the pre-dawn silence, many smile through their interrupted sleep. There goes our captain, they say, settling back into bed. There she goes to save another life. And that, let me tell you, makes all the noise worthwhile.